Hi, I'm Neil Ward-Dutton. I work for IDC in Europe, leading our AI and our automation practices. And in these weekly short videos, I'm talking about recent research we've done, conversations we've had, and ideas we're exploring. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Duncan Brown. Duncan.
Hey, hi Neil, how you doing?
I'm really good, and thank you so much for joining me on this.
Pleasure.
Yeah, so rather than giving the game away, could you just introduce yourself and talk a bit about what you're doing at IDC?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of run a wide portfolio of businesses at IDC, software, services, clouds, various other bits and bobs. But I've also recently just stepped back into my security role. It's probably my heartland. And so as part of that security leadership, I am looking at the future of trust. So that's a big subject at IDC, and we're trying to get our heads around it. So and very pertinent to the stuff that you're covering as well, Neil.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so certainly from our perspective, I mean, it's a very live issue, that whole issue of how AI can be trusted, can it be trusted indeed at all, and the contextual nature of that. So I know we don't have much time, and the future of trust is a complicated subject, but can you kind of distill it down for us, what your view in the team is around what the future of trust actually looks like and how it's comprised?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we're trying to get our hands around is what is trust. Mark Carney says that trust arrives on foot and leaves in a Ferrari, which just gets to the nub of how important it is and how important it is to retain. But what we're trying to do, I think at IDC, certainly we began looking at trust from a security and privacy point of view. And obviously these are core elements. But very quickly you realize that there are a whole bunch of other topics that are related to trust or depend on trust. So our ecosystems research, so the trust relationships within an ecosystem is really important. Customer experience, again, fundamentally around trust. Our sustainability practice, which is very close to my heart. I'm the executive sponsor for that practice. But essentially, sustainability is a way of communicating trust around particularly important issues felt really strongly by many people, particularly in Europe. And there's a whole range of other technologies and I guess socioeconomic considerations that are underpinned by trust or actually impact the level of trust that's going on. So it's a massive subject. So lots to talk about. Of course, AI is one of these things, as you mentioned earlier, about would you trust something related to AI? So yeah, it's big.
Yeah. Okay. And particularly in Europe, I mean, we've already mentioned Europe as a context briefly, but particularly in Europe, we can see that ethical approaches to AI and data usage, and in fact, algorithmic kind of exploitation generally are pretty high up the agenda, certainly when it comes to the European Commission and so on, and governments across European countries. And I guess this does fit into the future of trust, right? I guess as more decisions are being made using algorithms, do you see that there's a clear linkage there? I mean, what I'm kind of starting to see is that there's a whole chain of things that we need to rely on when we think about trust.
Yeah.
It's not just about brand at one end, and it's not just about sort of data and infrastructure at the other, but there's maybe a whole chain of things. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, would you get into a driverless car, Neil? That's the question. I mean, if you would, then you've got a really good understanding of the trust relationships, or just ridiculously naive. But most people are really quite concerned about this kind of prospect. And when you think about it, it's not just the manufacturer, it's the coders who develop the AI software that is in the car, probably not part of the manufacturing, probably not owned by the manufacturer, but third or fourth party contractors, and all those chains. And then outside, can you trust the insurance companies? Have they worked this out in terms of what happens if you have an accident? Governments, are they, what's the legislative environment for this in terms of liability? Smart cities, and are you picking up sensors from local government, and then are they on the hook if things go wrong? So the chain of trust is really quite a long and complex one. And of course, I think one of the big issues is what happens when it goes wrong. Do you have recourse, and to whom do you have recourse? Is it the manufacturer, or or what? Do you claim for insurance? Well, if it wasn't that he was driving, then is the insurance company the right party? So it's really complex, and that's just in one use case. There's a whole bunch of other use cases. So there are really, really important issues to unpick. So, and it's horribly complicated, and legislation lags, as always, the technology. So in the absence of that, I think, it's incumbent upon the technology manufacturers, vendors, to really be at the leading edge of that, and to take an ethical stance and say, this is what we think should happen. And then at least they can support the debate. Right.
Fantastic. And in fact, you preempted my last question. So we're good. I was going to ask you, what does it mean for AI vendors in particular, or vendors using AI? And I think what I heard was that it's really about kind of maybe getting ahead of legislation and driving the debate, right, rather than waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think also is really important, Neil, is it's just having a degree of empathy with people who don't necessarily understand the nuances of AI, but are the end users of it, because their experience and their understanding of what's happening, is going to be fundamental in the success of AI. So it's not good enough that the AI itself is really cool, but that it is aware of the end user surroundings. That's a really important relationship. So I think there's work to be done there, to be honest.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Really appreciate it. I'll let you get back to your day job now. But no, great to get your perspective, and looking forward to seeing more of what comes out of the Future of Trust work.
Cool.
Listen, thank you all very much for watching. As always, let me know what you think. And if you did enjoy it, please do all the usual things, like, share, subscribe, and I will see you again soon. Thanks again, Duncan. Thanks very much.